Welcome back to the program. This morning, our reviewer joins us virtually from the nation's capital. We're joined by a revered political analyst and socio-economic commentator, Dr. Aliyu Ilias. Hello, Doctor. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
Now, Doctor, let's get straight into the conversations. Leading the headline this morning is a position by academic dons, parents and stakeholders in the education sector over a perceived disagreement on the federal government's age policy and the 2025/2026 cutoff mark. Now, technically, it means that you need to score less than average in the 4 subjects you sit for JAMB to get admissions into university or polytechnics. For universities, is 150. For polytechnics, is 100 marks out of a possible 400. Is this a dip in our educational standard or a drop in the quality of education? What does this do to academic excellence?
The drop in quality, I must tell you, because these are the process we all pass through, and seeing that they have reduced it to that extent, that's a sad one. You recall that for out of that 400, if you are saying you are admitting one, that means it's about 35%. So, like what I saw in social media recently, that simply means that people that will be teaching our children in the future will score less than 35% to teach our children. It's a sad one, and we must urgently do something about it. I recall during our time when we discovered that some states are educationally backward, they introduced what we call remedial and pre programs. So I think they should go back to that and establish that for states that may be academically disadvantaged, so that you can maintain the standard as it is. And this is also pushing us to say that, is there relevant for JAMB again? That's the question again. Because I haven't have that 150, students are still going to be subjected to school examination before they can give them admission.
Is that in terms of post-UTME?
Post-UTME.
So many universities in Nigeria still conduct post-UTME. Despite,
is there any school that doesn't conduct post-UTME? There is no school that doesn't conduct it.
So what happens to the professional admission that JAMB offers you once you meet a certain cutoff? JAMB almost issues you an admission saying that you're eligible to be admitted into this university for having scored this mark.
Exactly, and that's why we must differentiate between promotional exam and qualifying exam, and we must quickly do that as soon as possible, because we are reducing the quality of our education. We're reducing the standard of education. I can tell you, most schools now will not even accept anything less than 200. I can mention them readily for you. University of Ibadan, OAU, some standard school will not even compromise giving admission to 150. That means you are taking people below average into school. That's a sad one that we must quickly do something about. It's very, very important that even the government, and led by Alausa, should look at it critically and observe it. In the same hand, we could see also that the Minister of Education also reduced the entry age to tertiary institution or university in particular to 16 years. Well, the fact is that we are going to look at cognitive ability and maturity. So when you combine the two together, you agree with me that what you say 16 years, yes, some children are cognitively sound that they can actually meet up, while some children must have matured at age 16. By and large, we must make sure that we take this education critical, because it will form our society and our standard in future. And that's why some of us see that we must review that state, because I expect JAMB to say there is mass failure this year. That is why we are reducing the cutoff mark. So there was not any background information on why they decided to reduce from 180 to 150. There must be a background information. They decided it's a stakeholder meeting. Yes. What was the consideration by the stakeholder meeting? Was it that there is mass failure? Because this speaks to mass failure. That means people doesn't meet up the cutoff mark. They should give us a breakdown of it, so that we know that, okay, it's because of mass failure. Possibly next year, we could also see an improvement in it. Perhaps, is it the method of setting the exam that is pretty difficult, or is it the CBT that is proving difficult for people to pass? We must do that findings so that we will not reduce the standard of education in Nigeria.
Now, talking about tackling the root causes, you've listed some possible reasons why this low performance is not our current reality. Talking about the computer-based test, before now, when it was done analog, it was as though persons needed to prove their mettle. But now with the introduction of technology, it almost seems as though every candidate and parent is blaming the technical difficulties that we experienced for this low performance. Do you see a situation where it is more or less on the part of teaching or on the part of the exam taking?
Right. So it's a two-way thing, because you could also see the system that doesn't resonate well. Most schools that are not in urban centers may find it difficult. Some children are there that they have not been exposed to computer in their school. I can tell, if you go to some schools now, you can see hardly see senior secondary school children handling computer. So if it's coming, you are handling it for the first time, it will be jittery. I recall I did CBT. Okay, when I want to get to a particular university, they subject us to write a CBT exam, and because we are not familiar with it, they have to be educating us on how to handle it. So it could also be a factor, because for me, I think if we have the written, pen and paper, people pass more, and they are still complaining that people also bypass and try to also write the system, the one that is written with computer, CBT. It's something that JAMB also need to look into critically, because if you don't look at it critically, we'll be subjecting our society to a low, or what do you call it, a mediocre people admitting into university, and that may also be inform the issue of bringing mediocre inside and graduating mediocre.
Now, you had mentioned the Education Minister, Dr. Tunji Alausa, and his approach towards rejigging the current education system. I know the federal government has also changed away from its 6-3-3-4 education policy, adopting a 12-4 policy, and this 16 age admission entry benchmark. Do you see it bettering our lots in terms of the quality of our graduates, or what do you see as the reasons behind this decision?
Right. So if you ask me, if you can admit a child by 16, that simply means by 20 they can graduate. How about the maturity itself? So some of us argue earlier that it's better we look at that maturity age, because you could be studying, then you don't know what you're actually doing, and it will affect you in terms of practice. And that's why we are looking at the cognitive part of it and the maturity part of it. So for me, I think some children are smart enough that at 16 they are very smart and they can actually do some things. But basically, for a maturity, it will start around that 16, 17, 18. So I think it's now the issue of is it 6-3-4? What do we arrange it now? It's another factor. So the age of entering the primary school or the pre-nursery school is another factor now. You recall that even at this age, a child of 3 months is going to school. A child of 1 year is starting school. So the chance of them graduating on time from school, and we are now also in the private conundrum. What I mean by conundrum is that when I was in primary school, we have maybe 40 of us in the class, and you have people that take first, you have people that take second, and you also have people that will take last, 40, 39. That's simplified and make it easy to measure the children. But nowadays, in private schools, all the children in the class are also always passing. They are always promoting. You find it difficult to actually prove if they actually, there is that standard of education. And that, if that continues, it will also affect our university education. And it will be, graduating a mediocre. So I think for me, 16, 17, 18 is good. Maybe let's look at, since they say it's stakeholder meetings that look at it. You recall that the former minister actually pegged it at 18, and I'm not sure if that's not what cost him his job. So for me, I think we should look at it very well. We should always consider the cognitive and the maturity of every student.
Well, I believe this conversation will continue into the coming weeks as more parents, universities, stakeholders, all in the education sector are reacting to this policy position of the government, pegging the minimum entry age into tertiary institutions across Nigeria at 16, and for the current academic calendar 2025/2026 at a cutoff mark of 150 out of a possible 400 marks. Now, moving on to another issue in the news this morning is as it affects our economy. The federal government and the International Monetary Fund IMF are in a disagreement over recommendations by IMF. The federal government is of the opinion that when they come to borrow funds, the IMF's position on our economy is quite different from when they give advisories. Now, the IMF is telling the federal government that despite the bold reforms under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, it needs to focus on poverty alleviation. I don't know what you make of this stance by the two bodies in line with our current economic realities.
Right. And that's where the federal government need to get it quite right. Britain owned institutions are concerned, and they are also looking at their own advantage, and they will tell you when it does not give them advantage. It is a clear thing that for the past 2 years that we have the Tinubu-led administration, that poverty has been dipping. And that's bring about the report that came out that all the reforms that they have been putting in place has not actually changed, improved or impact people positively in terms of poverty. Look at all the index that you could measure in terms of poverty reduction. Nigeria are still dipping more into poverty, and that reflects that most policy that they are bringing, we've not yet seen any positive impact, if at all it will be. Let's take it from the fuel subsidy removal. He said that when you remove fuel subsidy, there will be availability of money and a lot of things will fall in place. But 2 years down the line, we've not seen the positive impact. And some of us actually, from our economic analysis, said that it is wrong for you to remove fuel subsidy and also float the naira. And by so doing now, if at all you are giving a state, because the major language that this present government is using is that states are getting more money. But the question now is that states are getting more money, but what's the value of the money in the face of forex volatility? So when you give states about 500 million, and in the 2 years back, you give them 200 million, it's the same thing because of the value. So you hardly see it coming out. And I can also tell you that it also reflects on the purchasing power of Nigerians. You have also seen the manufacturing sector crying every now and then. So you don't do all those things without considering the economic impact of it. Even by removing fuel subsidy, you said you are going to provide our CNG. Our CNG actually transform our transport system. Our CNG actually reduce the cost of the transportation. These are the things that we have to look at. Then Bretton Woods institutions, especially IMF and World Bank, are together. They are also quick at giving you money. You recall that when we pay our COVID-19, we are quick to say, oh, we have actually pay our debts, and we are now positioned to borrow more. Their business is to borrow you money and get profit. Their business is to control your economy. But when you are doing bad, their business also will not hide you doing bad. They also come out and say you are doing bad. And that reflects the state of the economy of Nigeria. I can tell you, Nigerians are not better compared to our past two years.
Now, you've talked about key economic indices. One of those worrying indications is our double-digit inflation. Away from headline inflation, it's more even worrying when you look at food inflation. Why is it that there has been quite a non-consensus on the way to rescue Nigeria's food insecurity?
Right. So if you look at it, you have also gone to macroeconomic indicators that reflect the standard of living. But let's take it at food inflation. You recall, I said several times that if a Nigerians spend above 60% on food, and when you spend above 60% on food, what remains for you? A good economy, you must not spend more than 10% of your income on food in a month. Anything that are above 20%, that means you are in poverty, and you cannot use you cannot do other things such as rent, such as the other logistics, school fees, a lot of sundry expenditure to embark on. And how do we now tackle this food inflation? Because we have discovered that our major problem is food inflation. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to put a lot of things in place. Now, recall, I will take you back to 2023, July especially, when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu said he declared state of emergency on security, food security. We have to understand that, yes, he has gotten it right and understand where the problem lies. So we expect him to put a lot of things in place. First thing he said then was that he's going to get a land from every state, and there will be farming. Up to now, we have not seen it. Some of us quoted what he said then, that land belongs to states. You're supposed to negotiate with them first. Another thing is that we also expect to have what we call all-round farming. All-round farming would have reduced food inflation, because every now and then you can get what you need because of all-round farming through irrigation and through farming support. The worst thing was now food supply chain. if anything at all will affect food, is food supply chain. I can tell you, you can get some commodities or food commodities in Kebbi, Sokoto, Benue, but the cost of transporting that food to another place is as high as the amount you buy it. And that's why I think government introduced CNG, but we have not seen the CNG reflecting in that and reducing it. So until we solve the problem of food supply chain, we will continue to be like this. And then government must also embark on supporting agriculture. Do you know the stem that is being grown for cassava is being bought? I've never seen that before. Before you just cut it and people just leave it. Now you have to buy it in a bunch, and it's quite expensive. If you see, before you buy what do you call it, masara, what do you call
corn.
it? Is it corn?
Yes.
You buy corn, 300 naira, 200. Now one they will say one is 500 naira. That means we are in dire need for government intervention to look into agriculture. So food inflation, until we do the needful before we can actually come out of it.
Now, in times like this, you've talked about how much of our income, 60% is spent on consumption, particularly even food, to be specific. In other nations, the government steps in by providing a safety net for citizens. In Nigeria, conversation in recent time has been on the lack of a accurate national social register, despite some safety net programs under this current administration. How do you assess the efforts of the government in providing the much needed safety net to vulnerable and indigent Nigerians?
Right. We have seen several government intervention. I will let me take you back to Obasanjo. We have seen NAPEP. We have seen wealth creation by Yaradua. We have seen UWIN, subsidy reinvestment program by Jonathan. We have seen Empower and other. Is Empower? It's even much more social investment program, NSIP by Muhammadu Buhari. Those things they are just intervention. We have seen trader money. They are interventional in nature and they are temporary until you solve the root cause of the problem. Now, I can tell you that we are still agrarian in Nigeria. So if that is our focus, why don't we do more to make sure that we solve and make sure that food is not a problem? And how do you make food not a problem? Provision of fertilizer, encouraging farmers, going to mechanized farming, among other way of actually doing things. So these are the things we must actually look at to solve the food insecurity. Or to solve food insecurity, our inflation will continue. I can also tell you, recall that we are even looking at a rebased economy. If we do not rebase it, do you know where we will be today? Because it is an adjusted one at that. And even at that, we are still at 23%. It's a sad one that we are agrarian in nature. Most Nigerian states are still doing agriculture. Agriculture still employ more than 50% of Nigerians, and we are still struggling for food security.
Now, let's move on to another issue in the news because of time. We would have loved to look critically at this statement of the IMF and how Nigeria can achieve economic stability. But in the interim, let's turn focus to some political stories making the rounds. Now, in the wake of the coalition, the ADC interim national chairman under his new leadership structure, a two-time former Senate President, Senator David Mark, has come out this morning to ask that coalition leaders refrain from making public statements on their presidential ambition. He said that as it stands, the party has no preferred candidate. This is one of those quite much followed stories recently in line with conversations around 2027. I would like to find out from you what you make of this statement by Senator David Mark.
I think it's quite instructive, and I'm happy that it's taking the leadership as it's supposed to be. When you have about 5 people looking at becoming president, if you look at Rotimi Amechi, look at Obi, you look at Atiku, you look at most of them, they are eyeing that position. And in eyeing that position, they also, I've also listened to some of their supporters differently, and some of them are making sure that they mention their preferred candidates. In a coalition like this, it takes a whole lot of discussion, a lot of, internal agreement to actually come up with somebody who is have ambition. Perhaps let there be time that it is declared that if you have ambition, you can actually declare your interest. Not that as at now, if it started at now, that would have bring about problem to the coalition. So I think it's quite instructive and it's timely for him to call the attention of those, I know, bringing about a such statement to caution them and to tell them that it will take coalition. So in as much as you have the right, but let's the time be. And you recall that most of the things that actually affect other political parties, such as Labour, PDP, even NNPP, is because of lack of good leadership in their political party. So if we have a good leader like David Mark is proving to be, that tell them that this is the right thing, this is the right thing to do, that would have helped. You recall that the chance of coalition having problem is very high. So they must manage it properly, that somebody will not feel such change.
Now, the challenge on ground there is even the ADC's former presidential candidate, Duwumi Kachuku, has come out to say that the party was not carried along in its entirety in the decision to allow for an interim change in leadership. This is also seen a possible litigation, and now we're hearing that the interim leadership is assembling over 97 lawmakers to battle that alleged suit in the court of law. What do you make about this perceived fractionation of the ADC?
Well, it is quite expected, and I listened to one of their leader, Senator Riti Kinjibe, where she actually said, well, it is expected, and I agree with that you cannot have a such coalition that you not expect some legal tussle. But according to us, they have actually looked at the legalese, and they have actually looked at the constitution and follow the constitution as expected. You recall that most of the leadership actually resigned, and when they resign, that's when the new one actually had the opportunity of actually coming to be. Now, moving ahead as well, if you look at Duwumi Kachuku, you know, he has been having issue with Nwusu, the chairman. They've been having issue back and forth even before now. And perhaps I don't agree with him that he's not aware of what actually happened. Simply because they have been in this talk for over a year. So maybe he's waiting for now to actually become, to start the battle with them, which is also welcome. I think they should also talk to him, and maybe they should go to the legal route and solve the problem. But that they will not have issue, I expect they will have issue, and it is happening now.
Now, the coalition is also faced with a perceived bickering between them and the presidency. It's on the position of the fact that yesterday headlines were saying that there's an alleged intimidation by the presidency to the coalition. Do you see any of that being tenable?
Well, the fact is that, well, tenable or not tenable, we've seen some hands. They say hand of Jacob, voice of this, so I don't know how they used to put it. Now, the fact remains that if you look at all the political parties, they have one issue or the other. And those political parties did not mince words by saying that they are tracing the problem to APC. APC is causing problems within their party. So you won't say so, and this is a major coalition. I can tell you, they may be, APC might pretend that they don't have a fear of this coalition. I can tell you from findings that they are actually a problem if they actually come and being formidable. So it is true that when you talk, APC will have to respond to you, and when they are responding like an equivalency. An equivalency language actually take its own weight when it comes to issues like this.
Now, the other angles of this conversation is on the part of the other parties. We look at them as they come up. Some of the coalition members have not outrightly resigned from their former political parties. One of such persons is Mr. Peter Obi, who is still a member of the Labour Party. This morning, the other angle to the story is that the current factions under the Labour Party, the Senator Nanedi Usman-led party, and the Barrister Julius Abure party are now at loggerheads over an alleged expulsion of Mr. Peter Obi for this said anti-party activities. What do you make of the position of the coalition leaders not necessarily resigning from their parties to form a coalition under the umbrella or on the platform of the ADC?
Well, for me, in as much as it is coalition, I don't think there's anything bad on that coalition. Depends on the passive and the manner at which the political party actually take it. I've not seen PDP coming out to say they are actually expelling or removing those people that joined the coalition that are still PDP. The
Their
fact remains
chairman
that
this morning, acting chairman rather, national chairman Alhaji Damagun has also asked that those looking to pitch tents with the coalition should leave the PDP this morning. It's also an emergent story.
it's just will I say rhetorics? Is a mention. So we expect him to say we will actually expel you in 30 days if you don't decide what you want. So for me, I don't think it's bad. We've seen it globally. We've seen Macron of France. He came through coalition. We've seen different coalition across the globe. So coalition is not entirely bad in as much as they have interest. And perhaps in the long run, even the political party can also say, okay, we're joining the coalition and we are doing. So it depends on how they perceive it. And that's why I said, if other parties are not influenced, they will not say they will expel them, because we are looking at unseating the current president. I recall that even then.
But looking at looking at unseating the current president, I for one have an issue with that, because I would expect the coalition to prefer alternative policy directions. They almost make it seem as though their target going into 2027 is sending President Bola Ahmed Tinubu back to Lagos, or other than telling Nigerians about a way out of this current situation, which the IMF has said is a worrying statistics on our poverty index.
Well, I'm not holding brief for them, but I think they have not got to that level. By the time they get to that level, I'm sure they will provide for Nigerians, and Nigerians have to choose between the two. They are at the level of coalition now. So maybe after that, they will now start providing that, because you cannot convince Nigeria again if you don't have a good alternative. Nigeria are tired of rhetorics, and that's what actually brought about APC taking out PDP. So until they give us that, and I agree with you, they must do more in terms of providing alternatives. So that, I recall that even President Bola Ahmed Tinubu said jokingly that I am the president. Anything you say that you are going to do, I will take it over and I will do it. I am the president. Now he's also conscious of the alternative and said he's going to maximize anything they say. But the fact remains that they need to convince us further why Nigerians should give them opportunity. So they must provide that alternative, like you rightly mentioned.
Now let's come to matters of our security situation. It's very alarming this morning that a governor of the state, who is considered as the chief security officer, is bemoaning what he is saying is an ancestral terrorism problem. In Governor Diko Radda's words, he says, if you take a demography of the bandits in Katsina, that 90% of them are indigenes, that they know their fathers and grandfathers. And one of the first questions that will come to mind is, if you know so much information about those terrorizing you, how hard it is to now apprehend them and fight these bandits head on.
I'm glad that they are coming out to say that. You recall that Governor Soludo also came out and said those that are terrorizing Anambra are 99.9% Anambarians. And Katsina also have said it. So we are now coming to the reality now. That is not an outsider that is coming. It's people inside that are coming. So what is the solution now? And the solution is simple. The issue of giving pardon, people who commit a heinous crime and you pardon them, we need to review it. I recall during the time of Anini, there is this capital punishment. Once they find you wanting, they give you capital punishment, until our governors also summon that courage of signing, death warrants or death sentence. That's when we will start, because if there's no capital punishment for these people and they go after 5 years they get a pardon, or after some years they say they surrender and they put them back, it's another problem. Then you also recall that we have seen two leading person. We have seen the army chief said the cause of terrorists in Nigeria can be linked to poverty. I'm sure two of them mentioned it. That shows that what IMF is saying, what those army chiefs are saying, are also a pointer that Nigeria need to have a better standard of living. That because people are idle, people don't have something to do, there's poverty. That's what is also pushing them to such a heinous crime. And that reflects what is happening in Katsina, what's happening in Sokoto. Because if you look at those states, they are backward in terms of development. And that's why we must also hold our leaders responsible, that they must make sure that the allocation they are getting are well spent on what can benefit and develop Nigerians.
Now, the challenge with this multi-hydra system of terrorism, like you said, is the poverty index in such places, making it easier for such persons to be recruited into terrorism. Now, it's not as though those states are lacking natural resources. They've also linked illegal mining activities to this terrorism and banditry in those countries, in those states rather. How can the government show political will to end it?
Right. I think the first thing is that you recall that natural resources, be it anywhere, belongs to the federal government. So for me, I would propose where a government would say, states use it and give us some percentage. Maybe that would have helped more, because states will now have total authority. Because some states are even in cahoots with those that are mining to get some things, behind back door. But if you give it to states maximize what is in your environment and drop 30% of it into the federal coffers, I think that would be better. But in this situation now, federal government owns everything. Even state needs to go and get permits to actually be able to have a firm that will do some of those mining. So I think we need to look at way of managing those natural resources to make sure that we actually manage them well and encourage and engage. Because if state is managed, like we say Nasarawa have about 18 natural resources, we is having like 10 or 15. If they are in charge of it, it will have created employment, and government will do more, state government will do more to get more so that they can contribute more to the center. So maybe we should review the way we manage our natural resources in Nigeria.
Now, talking about the approach to fighting terrorism, the Defense Headquarters always monthly gives statistics of how many bandits have been eliminated and the progress in the fight against terrorism. From the outside looking in, how well would you say that our current security chiefs have handled the task of fighting insecurity?
If you ask me, I think the Nigerian army are overstretched. And are getting overwhelmed because we could see that they will ambush them and kill them. Psychologically, they are not settled. And that's why some of us canvas for kinetic and non-kinetic approach. Because I've not seen the critical role DSS is playing in this issue of insurgency. Because if we can actually tame all these things by intelligence, that would have helped us more. And beyond that also, you cannot continue to carry gun to actually attack these people, because the more you attack them, the more they even regroup people even within. So until we start and looking at the role of traditional ruler itself, there was this state that said if the traditional ruler cannot give them information, they can depose them. So I think traditional ruler should be given role in terms of security to update them on what is happening in their community so that it can help, because it cannot be everywhere. Ministry cannot be everywhere. Pocket of issues will continue to happen. But if we have a good traditional rulers that always inform the federal government of what's happening in real time, I think that would have helped. So I think non-kinetic should be applied too.
Now, overarchingly, we have been clamoring for the next national population census in Nigeria. Do you see the current insecurity challenge being a hindrance to that? And what do you make of this notion that we still have ungoverned spaces in the country?
Well, I will agree with you that we have some ungoverned places. I recall I went for a research in part of the north, and I'm to cover about 188 local government in a particular region. And I recall that in doing that, we have to go into some interior parts of the north. And by the time we get there, some places they will tell you cannot go with a phone that are smart. Some places they tell you can only go with small. Sometimes they will tell you cannot even go with any particular phone. So I can tell you there's some places that are ungoverned. So we must do everything to make sure that those places are well governed. Then in terms of statistics that we see every now and then from the military, they are doing their own part. But like I always said, it's not about what they are bringing out. It's about the psychology of those people getting more people recruiting. You wonder why with this number of people that have been eliminated, this insurgency instead of getting weak, it's as if it's waxing as stronger on their part, and that's why intelligence must come to play in this case.
Well, Doctor, we must thank you for taking our time to speak to us on the issues making the rounds on the news this morning. We appreciate you, and we wish you the best of your day.
Thank you for having me.